Good morning. We are studying in the book of Ecclesiastes. You know I'm forgetful. I have to do it when I think about it. We finished chapter 5 last week, albeit hurriedly. Is that how you say that word? You ever pronounce a word that you've said a bunch? It just doesn't sound right for some reason. Hurriedly. Yeah, I think that's it. We finished that right at the end, and I was looking. I think I got it right there at the end, but basically, the first part of chapter 5 dealing with being careful with how we approach God in worship, being careful with our words, and especially words here in the context of making a vow, a promise of something, especially toward God. We talked about the importance of being careful with our words in the sense of vows when it comes to how we approach God in prayer, but also just in general committing to, we talked about in the context of just committing to follow God, to follow Jesus as a Christian, and we need to remember that, and I often try to emphasize that to folks if it's a new Christian or someone who's thinking about obeying the gospel. I've sometimes even talked to people before that have been Christians for a long time. Maybe they've turned away. Say, hey, remember the commitment you made. Remember the promise you made. Don't. That's not something to take lightly. That's not something to just, it was a tough time in life. Things are better now. But we can do that if we're not careful. The verses 8 through 17 dealing with the vanity of gain and honor, and I just want to go back and mention this because, like I said, we were kind of quick, running out of time at the end of class last week. Verses 13 through 17 here in chapter 5 are really all kind of still tied to verse 12. The idea there that the hardworking man who enjoys life and the relationships that really are the fabric of life. This fella, he sleeps well. He puts in a hard day's work, honest day's work for an honest day's pay, and he can sleep better for it. But yet here you have another man that is, he's as the ESV puts it, he's got a full stomach. The abundance of the rich is the way the New King James puts it, and I think the older King James as well. Yeah, the abundance of the rich will not suffer him to sleep. He's constantly worried about it because his mind is not on enjoying the blessings that he has from God and using them to help others and to further relationships and so on. It's just on his money. He can't sleep. And again, I'm reminded, we mentioned it earlier, I think maybe back in chapter 4. Kind of reminds us of the Charles Dickens character, Scrooge. Just like he can't have any peace in his life, in his mind, because he's just so obsessed over his stuff and hoarding it. Is somebody going to take it from me? Getting more of it. Whereas here you have contrasted a person who's content, and they may say, I could lose everything. A lot of folks, probably some folks in here, remember, for my generation, it's kind of, our thing is 9/11. And I remember my mom telling me, she said, I worked several more years past when I had hoped to retire because it was such an economic fallout from that a lot of folks' retirement, mutual funds, 401ks and things like that, it just plummeted. And it really, really, it showed how quickly things can just disappear, go away. And so you got a person here who's content. Again, life is more about relationships than it is stuff and money. they say, yeah, something may happen to it, but it's just things. It's just stuff. And God's going to take care of us. But then you've got the person who is so wealthy, and it's not the wealth that's the problem, it's the attitude toward it. You can't even sleep at night. But verses 13 through 17, essentially just saying that if it's all about money, if it's all about gain, if it's all about stuff, that's ultimately just a miserable existence. And that's kind of the bottom line. That's really a good summation of a lot of chapter 5 here, especially this last section. But then verses 18 through 20, it's the positive side of verses 8 through 17. The vanity of gain and honor. Well, 18 through 20 kind of looks at that from the other side, which is interesting to me because you see he's kind of building on this as well, because when you get into chapter 6, once he's talked about in chapter 5, the proper way to view wealth and to use wealth, he's going to consider the opposite, an improper way, an improper view toward wealth in chapter 6. And so sometimes, well, I won't say sometimes, I think it's fair to say often in Ecclesiastes, Solomon does this. He'll look at one aspect, he'll look at the other side of that. We sometimes use that the expression, phrase, the other side of the coin. And you see that a lot in Ecclesiastes. So verses 18 through 20 of chapter 5 is the idea that life has true enjoyment, true purpose, true meaning with God. So money, wealth, work, these are not bad things, but we need to share those with others, and we need to use those for God, to serve others, to glorify God, and to help others to do the same. And then verse 20, especially is where I want to mention, it's the way the King James puts it: he shall not much remember the days of his life, because God answereth him in the joy of his heart. The New King James says he will not dwell unduly on the days of his life, because God keeps him busy with the joy of his heart. And you see the ESV there, for he will not much remember the days of his life, because God keeps him occupied with joy in his heart. We have an expression, idle hands. I can't be the only one that knows this expression. I thought I heard Jimmy say it. Idle hands with the devil's workshop, right? And it's not something that's explicitly stated in the Bible, but it certainly is a biblical concept. And that seems to be some of the idea here. My mom, I think I've mentioned this before, when we were growing up. Of course, it's a little different now, the way that school is set up, and we almost have year-round schooling because there's several breaks kind of spread out, and even summer break is not that long anymore. But back when I was in school, you didn't have a fall break, you didn't have a winter break, and so when school got out, usually we'd get out decently early in May, and you would have I guess I said decently early, I think it was middle part, but at least by Memorial Day, and you had all of June, all of July, and just about all of August. My birthday is August 27th, and I remember that because my my birthday present almost every year was going back to school. It always seemed to fall like second or third day of the school year when we went back. I'd have my birthday, and it just kind of was like, wow, what a great birthday present, going back to school. But there was this long summer break, and you know how just people in general, but especially in youth, after about maybe June, July, a lot of times you'd have camps and maybe a family vacation or something. But by August, you're coming in the morning, and it's like, Mama, I'm bored. And that was a mistake ever to say to my mom, because her answer always was, well, let me find you something to do. And, it's like you would think you would learn this lesson in childhood, but so many times my sister and I both, we come in there and maybe even just be talking to each other. Like, man, I'm really bored. And it's like, even if Mom overheard it, she would say, oh, y'all are bored. well, I have lots that I can get you to do. And it's like, no, we're going to go do it. No, you're bored. Come on. And so it was like too late once you said it. That seems to be kind of the idea here. God keeps him busy with the joy of his heart. I was trying to think of that expression that I read, or a quote. I can't remember it. I can't remember the words of it. But I read a quote one time. It was something to the effect of when we're, no, it was, it's the danger when things come to you on the moment. Blessed is the man who is too busy to worry in the daytime, too tired to worry at night. I think it was something to that effect. And there's a lot of truth in that. Here's a guy that he's not just sitting around idle, he's occupying himself not just for the sake of work, and of course Solomon deals with that here in Ecclesiastes, but because he realizes there's a benefit in work. He's trying to support a family, to support himself. So he's, by the end of the day, and he's tired, and he's going to, again, that goes back to what we looked at there in verse 12 of this chapter, chapter 5. And so when night comes, he's going to sleep because he's tired. He's been working. But during the day, he doesn't have time to be worried about so many different things because he's busying himself with the various things of life. And so I think there's a lot of truth in that. But also, notice, I think it's, I had in my notes ESV, but I think it's better in the New King James. He will not dwell unduly on the days of his life. I touched on this very quickly at the end of class last week, but it seems to be saying here that if we do what he's describing in verses 18 and 19 here, eat, drink, find enjoyment, or enjoy the good of all your labor in which you toil under the sun all the days of your life which God gives you, that's your heritage. If we just enjoy that in its proper perspective, and again, as for every man to whom God has given riches and wealth and given him power to eat of it, to receive his heritage and rejoice in his labor, this is the gift of God. So it seems to be in there in verse 20, especially the way the New King James renders it, it seems to be saying if we do that, we do verses 18 and 19, we live in the moment. God gives us memories for a reason. Memory is not a bad thing. But is it not a fact that sometimes we, people in general, and especially if we're not careful, and especially when we get to the point where we're not very content in life, we can sit and just pine away for the good old days. And there was I think it was a country song years ago, that there was a line in that song that he says, the good old days weren't always so good. And he goes on in that next line to say, and tomorrow ain't as bad as it seems. And so there's a blessing of living in the moment. Don't be worried so much about tomorrow that, and Jesus deals with this, Matthew chapter 6, sufficient to the day is the evil thereof. Don't worry about all those things. God will take care of you. You do your part, but trust in God. Don't get all anxious about tomorrow, but at the same time, seems to be he's saying here in Ecclesiastes 5:20, don't get so obsessed and thinking about how much better things were back whenever. I have worked before with entire congregations that, I won't say entire congregation, but I mean the congregational kind of mindset of the congregation. A smaller congregation I worked with one time, that it was just, especially in the first few months that we were there working with this congregation, I could not get over how often, I'm talking from elders to some of the deacons to members, they would just sit in kind of nostalgic, this type of nostalgia where they just talk about, I remember we had this auditorium so full. It was just 15, 20 years ago, whatever it was. And it was, we had probably triple the people we have in here now. Again, not bad in and of itself. It's not bad to sit and to be a bit sad to think of souls that are not there anymore. Where are those people? A lot of them had left. They had endured a split several years previous to that. And some of them had gone off into this fellow that just led a group away and was kind of set up his own church. It wasn't really the Lord's church. He had a lot of even doctrinal issues. But they just talk about this. It's, again, not bad to think about people that are not where they need to be and to be concerned about that. But here's my point. They would almost be obsessive over it, number one. Number two, I would sit down sometimes and talk with the leadership about doing this, that, or the other for evangelism. And I would get, well, we're just a small congregation. What can we do? Well, it was a small congregation. It was a small congregation that had no long-term debt, over $250,000 sitting in the bank account. Boy, the good old days, huh? Well, what are we doing to try to recapture, to build on that, to get back to that, and even go beyond that? Sometimes we can sit and just become so paralyzed by just reflection on the good old days that we're not doing anything to improve the current days or day. And that was super frustrating to me. And even talking to some of the members, that was in the leadership, but sometimes even talking to the members, hey, let's go make a visit. Well, I don't, I'm just not real comfortable with that, or I don't know if I'm busy this week. You couldn't get folks to pitch in and help out with evangelism, but everybody would just sit and talk about the good old days. Well, we can just become content with that, can't we? And so that seems to be what he's saying here at the very last verse of this chapter is, here's a fella, you do that idea there, verses 18 and 19, in this context specific to wealth and the blessings that God gives us. You won't dwell unduly on the good old days of life, because you know what? You're just so busy right now, serving God, serving others, building those relationships that make up life, and enjoying the here and now. Yeah, God gives us memory for a good reason, but not for us to just sit and obsess and dwell on the past. So that's I want to mention that because I think that's a key point there in chapter 5. Now, as we get ready to go into chapter 6 here, as you can see, it's a very short chapter, just 12 verses. And here's the New King James heading. And you can see the ESV kind of maintains this under the heading from chapter 5. Same one, yeah. The heading here that goes all the way back to verse 8, the vanity of wealth and honor. I think that works. This is all still kind of in that same section. But the New King James gives this heading for chapter 6, wealth is not the goal of life. And you'll see this covers just that entire chapter if you want to kind of think of it in terms of a theme or a heading. But before we get into that, as I mentioned, the first several verses here, he's going to look at the flip side of the proper view of wealth, proper use of wealth, and really, I keep saying wealth, but blessings in general. And when we say that, we mean a wealth of blessings. But I do want to mention this. I've had this in my notes several times, and I've just been so pressed for time, I hadn't had a chance to mention it. But I want to give this list quickly, and I think hopefully we can get through chapter 6 as well this morning. I saw this in the World Video Bible School notes. It's a list of a series of vain things that Solomon identifies throughout the book. We've seen 11 so far, and we get to number 12 here in chapter 6. But I'll just give you these. Again, we've covered a lot of these, but I don't know that I'd ever sat down and looked and like, wow, he's got in his notes, in the World Video Bible School notes, 18 of these. And you'll see sometimes where he'll say, this is vanity or striving for the wind, whatever. Number 1, human accomplishments. That's chapter 1, verse 14. 2 is pleasure, the vanity of just living for pleasure, chapter 2, verse 1. Profit from labor. Chapter 2, verse 11. Nothing wrong with labor, nothing wrong with profiting from one's labor. But if that becomes the purpose of my life, where I find meaning in life, well, it's going to be a pretty vain, empty existence. That's chapter 2, verse 11. Striving for wisdom, 2:15. A focus, again, keep in mind with these, all of these are not something that's wrong in and of themselves. It's just if you make that, if you're striving for wisdom, knowledge, expertise, that's all you care about in life, you try to make that what life is about, that's vanity. Number 5 is focus on earthly accomplishments, chapter 2, verse 21. Don't make that just the sole focus of your life. Overemphasis on this life, living in this life, chapter 3, verses 19 through 21. Competition, chapter 4, verses 4 through 6. Remember we talked about in that section kind of what you so often see even in our society today, and it's not something new to us. It'll continue as long as mankind is here, as long as the earth stands. This idea of keeping up with your neighbor. We sometimes say, keeping up with the Joneses. I got to, my neighbor gets something new, well, I want to get that. My friend gets something new, I want something as good or better. Competition. You get so obsessed with that, it's vanity. Stockpiling riches, chapter 4, verses 7 and 8. Trying to please everyone, chapter 4, verse 16. Chapter 10, or number 10, we looked at this one just last week and some today even. Foolish use of words and promises or vows, 5, 1 through 7. And then we've been talking this morning here and yesterday, or last week, money is another one. That would be number 11, 5, 10 through 17. Here in chapter 6, 1 through 6, we get to number 12, the vanity of having wealth but failing to use it properly. We'll also see number 13 here, assuming we can get that far in chapter 6. So, he says, there is an evil which I have seen under the sun, and it is common among men. So he says this, what he's about to talk about here, it's evil, and it's common among men. Both ESV, New King James, render that evil as well. The New King James says common among men, like the King James, and the ESV says it lies heavy on mankind. This is a manuscript difference, but either way, it's something that is common among men. But certainly, even that idea of it lies heavy on mankind, something that might would say we all have to deal with. So, you see the similarity, the idea there being common among men. So he goes on to say, verse 2, a man to whom God hath given riches, wealth, and honor, so that he wanteth nothing, lacketh nothing, we would say, for his soul of all that he desireth. He doesn't lack anything of what he desires. He's very wealthy, in other words. He wants it, he can get it. Yet God giveth him not power to eat thereof, but a stranger eateth it. This is vanity, and it is an evil disease. So, vanity, evil affliction is the way the New King James puts it there at the end of verse 2. Vanity or grievous evil, ESV says. And on the surface, this kind of sounds like, whoa, what's going on here? Because here's somebody that, as the New King James says, God's given him riches, wealth, honor. He doesn't lack for himself anything of all that he desires. But God doesn't give him power to eat of it, but a foreigner consumes it. Well, why would God do that to him? Well, let's pause here for just a second, and we'll make a few observations. Again, having discussed the proper way to use and view wealth previously in chapter 5, he's going to consider the opposite here. And he says this improper view, it's evil, it's common among men. But here's somebody that God's given them wealth. This person, again, he's not lacking for anything. But unlike the man there at the end of chapter 5, he's not going to enjoy it, nor will his son, or, as the case may be, sons. So what it seems here that he's saying, and he specifically says, you see there New King James says, yet God, middle part of verse 2, yet God does not give him power to eat of it. God does not give him power to enjoy them, is the way the new ESV renders it. Seems to be saying, here's a person who fails to recognize God as the source of his blessings. Even as he is so blessed, he lacks nothing, but he's not giving God the credit. I've heard this a few times. I don't remember ever hearing it until like maybe just a few years ago. I say a few years ago. It's been several years, but it's been since we came to Bremen, as I recall. But I heard a preacher say it. I think it was Cliff Goodwin that mentioned this. The idea, and I've heard it a few times since. I don't know if it's supposed to be like a fable or something, but it's the illustration of a pig, and he's sitting under a tree, and I mean just acorns are everywhere, falling on the ground. I was at my parents' house yesterday, and Dad wanted me to get up and clean some of the junk that they've got a sunroom, and the roof is flat, and so it just piles up with leaves and pine straw and stuff. And so I got up there and was blowing that off yesterday for them, and never in my life have I seen so many acorns. I mean, it's just crazy. So here's this pig. He's sitting under the acorn tree, and so, I mean, he doesn't even have to move. He just reaches over, and he can just get down and get some acorns, and he's just munching on acorns, and he's just living the life. But he never once thinks to even so much as to look up and go, wow, isn't this nice that I'm under this tree, and it's just supplied me with all these acorns. And why? Well, because he's a pig. But people ought to be, at least, better, smarter, wiser than a pig. So here's a guy that seems that he's saying in chapter 6, these first two verses, he's like that pig. He's just sitting under the acorn tree, and he's enjoying the blessings that God is showering upon him. He doesn't lack for anything. He doesn't want for anything. Yet no thoughts of God, no thoughts of thanking God, and especially no thoughts of seeking God's will regarding how to use those blessings as he goes through his life. And so as a result of all this, God removes the blessing of that wealth, and he gives it to a stranger, is the way the King James puts it, foreigner. New King James, and I think, no, ESV has stranger as well, but that's the idea of someone else. He removes the satisfaction, the peace of mind of passing that wealth along to his son or sons. And so Solomon concludes that this is vanity and it's an evil affliction there at the end of verse 2. It also, by the way, reminds us of another passage in Luke chapter 14. There's this fella, is it 14 or 12? We call him the rich fool. And he's got such a great crop that comes in, and he decides, I'm going to tear down my barns. I'm going to build bigger barns. Yeah, it's 12, sorry. 12, 16 and following. And so he decides, I'm going to tear down my barns and build bigger barns. And I'm just going to say to myself, take it easy, and you got it made. And God says to him, thou fool, this night thy soul shall be required of thee. And then whose shall those things be? What then? And so things can come to us and we can be so blessed, but things can go away in a moment. What if we lose everything today? Then what? Have we lost all purpose, all meaning in life? Not if we have a proper view toward our wealth, toward our blessings. We say, well, you know what, we'll start over, we'll build again, we'll rebuild our lives, but you know, you've seen it, maybe it's a TV show, maybe it's a movie, maybe it's a book. It's a biblical thought, people that they lose everything, and they say, and of course it happens many times in real life, and they say, hey, we'll recover from this because we still have each other, and that's stuff, those are things, that's all going to burn one day. What's important is the relationships that we have, and of course, most importantly, relationship with God. So this 12th vain thing is having wealth and failing to use it properly. And of course, this will continue on down through verse 6. Then in verse 3, he's going to give another example of someone who fails to acknowledge, to appreciate blessings from God. He says, if a man begat 100 children and lived many years. Now, this is hyperbole, which is what? What do we mean when we say something is hyperbole? It's an exaggeration. We use hyperbole all the time. I just used it. It's an exaggeration for what purpose? It's for emphasis, right? We've talked about this before. We talk about hermeneutics, and you see quite often in Scripture, exaggeration is used. We use that in speech. The Bible uses it in its literature to emphasize things many times. We may say we went somewhere, man, I waited forever. Well, I'm exaggerating, but for the sake of, it was a long time, a lot longer than it should have been, or at least I felt it should have been. So he says he may beget 100 children and live many years, so that the days of his years be many, and his soul be not filled with good, and also that he have no burial. So again, here's an example of somebody who fails to acknowledge, appreciate their blessings. He's a guy that has 100 children. Exaggeration to emphasize. But he has a large family, a long life, and yet he's still unsatisfied, unfulfilled. Still feels like life is just, something's missing. Here's a man that dies and he has no burial. The idea here being no proper burial, or we might even say no mourning for him. And a lot of times you see that. Here's a person that they're so obsessed with their stuff and their wealth, and that becomes their true love in their lives, and they neglect relationships. And when they die, when they're gone, may not even be death. It may just be they lose everything for whatever reason. And who's concerned about that? Well, a lot of times it's very few. Again, I think about, Scrooge. Think about Ebenezer Scrooge, and he didn't have friends. That's all he cared about was his money. I also was reminded of King Jehoram of Judah, and he was a rotten fella. Brother Eddie Brinkley used to say he was rotten to the core, and the core was too. 2 Chronicles 21:20, it says of Jehoram, king of Judah, that the way it's put in the New King James, to no one's sorrow departed. He died without being desired, is how the old King James puts it. In other words, nobody mourned for him. It goes on to say, howbeit they buried him in the city of David, but not in the sepulchres of the kings. He didn't even get a proper burial for a king of Judah. Why? Well, because he was rotten. So, kind of the idea here. Then there's this last phrase of verse 3. And this thought's going to go through verse 6. He says, also that he have no burial, I say that an untimely birth is better than he. For he cometh in with vanity, and departeth in darkness, and his name shall be covered with darkness. Moreover, he hath not seen the sun, nor known anything. This hath more rest than the other. Yea, though he live 1,000 years. There's that hyperbole again, exaggeration to emphasize. Yea, though he live 1,000 years, twice told, yet hath he seen no good. Do not all go to one place. So this last phrase of verse 3 and on down through verse 6, he's comparing this man who improperly views and uses his wealth and misuses even. He's comparing him to a stillborn or a miscarried child. And he's even going to say in many cases that the stillborn or miscarried child has advantages over this man. And so just working through these next verses 4 through 6, he's going to say, number one, he comes in vanity, futility. I was thinking one of these versions. Nope. I was thinking one of them had futility. But he comes in vanity, or we would say futility, probably indicating the idea of coming into a vain, futile purposeless world, and the world is, in and of itself, vain, purposeless. Now, with God, some of that goes back to chapter 3. God's made everything beautiful in His time. With God, that's not the case. But if you just take this life in and of itself, yeah, it's vain, purposeless. So He comes in vanity or futility. Notice second, here there in verse 4, He departeth in darkness. He departs in darkness. In other words, He goes into obscurity. Here's this stillborn or miscarried child, the idea of somebody who doesn't have, they don't have many years, they don't grow up, they don't develop a reputation, gather all these riches and things, and there's no reputation to be mocked when they're gone. There's no foolish mistakes. There's no loss, as opposed to the man that's been mentioned in the previous verses. Number 3, His name shall be covered in darkness. That kind of goes with the previous phrase. This number 3 comes from verse 5. Moreover, He hath not seen the sun. He's not seen the sun. Never sees the sun. None of the experiences of those who, as we often say, live to see the light of day. And so here again, He's saying in many cases, here's a stillborn child that would have an advantage over this fella. And then He says also, nor known anything. This hath more rest than the other. And so there also verse 5, He says He never knows anything, this stillborn child. No bad experiences to have to remember, reflect upon, regret, or be tempted to dwell upon, we talked about earlier. None of those bad experiences, and really we could say also no good experiences either for a stillborn. But that's not the emphasis here. The emphasis here is the bad. And so He's saying, hey, in some ways, stillborn child's better, and this person has such a rotten, ungodly, unhealthy view toward his wealth and his blessings and using them in much the same way. Because, He says there in verse 6, yea, though he live 1,000 years twice told, yet if they see no good, do not all go to one place. Same joy as a stillborn, that joy being none. Because both end up in the realm, we often call it the Hadean realm from the way it's worded in the New Testament. Sheol is the Hebrew term. Both end up in the realm of the dead. And so what's the point of a long life? A life filled with wealth and blessings if it's only going to be lived with dissatisfaction and misery. You could live 100 years. You could live 1,000 years. But if you have an improper view towards your blessings, if you improperly use your blessings, what's the point? It's just a miserable existence. And so again, it seems to be emphasizing the foolishness of life lived without God and the worthlessness of that life. So then he goes on in verse 7 here in chapter 6 to say, all the labor of a man, or all the labor of man is for his mouth, and yet the appetite is not filled. Or the soul is not satisfied. I like the ESV rendering. All the toil of man is for his mouth, yet his appetite is not satisfied. I don't know. I looked at this footnote. What does it say? Filled. And I put in my notes a cross-reference here back to chapter 5, verse 10. And I'll just read this to you from the King James Version. He that loveth silver shall not be satisfied with silver, nor he that loveth abundance with increase. This is also vanity. Only God, only spiritual things and things related to God can truly satisfy and fulfill man's deepest needs. And that really is so much of the book of Ecclesiastes. You can look for it in wisdom, you can look for it in wealth, you can look for it in notoriety or fame and all these other things. And those things just cannot offer real meaning, depth, purpose, fulfillment in life. So that seems to be what he's saying there in verse 7. Verse 8, for what hath the wise more than the fool? What hath the poor that knoweth to walk before the living? So what advantage, as the ESV puts it, does the wise man have over the fool? What advantage does the poor man have who knows how to conduct himself before the living? And the answer is nothing. Not a thing. Because without God, there's no advantage to either. He's not saying it's inherently better to be poor, to be a fool. Obviously not better to be a fool. But he's saying, if you have all that wealth, what advantage is it to you over the poor person? If you have all this wisdom, knowledge, technical expertise, what good is that to you over the fool? If you don't use those things, thank God for those things, use them to serve him and others. And the answer is none. No advantage to either. If you misuse your blessings, really there's no difference in them and any old fool or any old poor man. Verse 9, better is the sight of the eyes than the wandering of the desire. This is also vanity and vexation of spirit. This is an interesting verse. Again, I put a cross reference to chapter 5, verse 10. He that is satisfied, he that loveth silver shall not be satisfied with. In other words, if you love money, if life's all about money and stuff, you will never, ever, ever be satisfied because you can never have enough. And so the sight of the eyes, as opposed to the wandering of desire. I heard one preacher, might have been in the World Video Bible School notes. He said, here's a fella, he could lust after any number of women and look right past his beautiful bride that sits across the table from him, that dwells with him, that serves him and helps him and encourages him. And he can have his eyes all over the world trying to find and look at other women and yet fail to see what's right there in front of his eyes. We sometimes say, you don't see the forest for the trees. I don't know if that's the right expression, but what's the other one I thought of that I think it made me think of? A bird in hand is worth two in the bush. In other words, instead of just having your eyes wandering all over the place, the idea here is contentment, obviously. Look what's right in front of you. The grass always seems greener on the other side. And so he says, there's something to be said for contentment because there's always something more to see, to desire. Always more. What if I'm just content with what I have? I work, give that honest work, and I'm striving to make more in the sense of providing, and not even wrong to have more wealth, but learn to be content. And so again, teaching against covetousness, because covetousness consumes. It will consume you. If I'm not satisfied with my bride, if I'm not satisfied with my house, my family, my stuff, on and on it goes, it'll just consume you. Sometimes we just need to open our eyes and see what's right here in front of us and realize just how blessed we are. And sometimes it may be going to another country that's very poor. It might just be going to another area within our own country and seeing some very poor people. I've told y'all before about several years ago, I was just right fresh out of preaching school. I don't even think I was 21 years old yet at this time. We had a member of the congregation where I was up in St. Louis area. He's in Children's Hospital in St. Louis. They think he's got leukemia. It's like, oh, wow. So had a good prognosis and to this day doing very well. But we didn't know how that was going to go at that point. So I go with the preacher. And, man, I was just down in the dumps that day about something that really wasn't that important. And so I go with the preacher to make this visit. I'm feeling pretty down, and I came out of there literally with tears in my eyes because seeing some of those children and what they were enduring and realizing, man, my life is great. Because there were some kids just dealing with things that a kid should never have to deal with. Families dealing with sickness, cancer, and things like that. Covetousness, it'll consume us. And we need to learn to be content. We'll stop there, and he's going to go on to say that which hath been is named already, and yet it is not known that it is man, neither may he contend with him that is mightier than he. We'll stop there and pick up with verses 10 and 11 next week, Lord willing, and see this 13th thing that he's going to list that is vanity, and that is even the ability to use words masterfully. That's vanity, and you'll see this. Really, you need the ESV rendering to see that pointed out clearly. All right, we're out of time, so we'll stop there. We almost got through chapter 6, but we'll pick up in verses 10 and 11, Lord willing, next week. Thank y'all so much for your time and attention.